The human had been working alone on the remote mining moon for weeks. Life there was quiet, almost painfully so, with the cold gray landscape stretching endlessly under a pale sun. He didn't mind the solitude much. He had learned to enjoy the sound of his own breathing, the gentle hum of machinery, and the occasional gust of wind carrying fine dust that glimmered under the faint light. Most people avoided places like this, calling them dangerous or unwelcoming. But for him, it was a place where nothing else mattered, where he could focus on his work and keep his mind clear. One morning, as he was walking to inspect a collapsed ventilation shaft, something unusual caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just a shadow or a trick of the light, but then he noticed movement. Tiny, trembling shapes huddled near the edge of the shaft. His first thought was that it was some kind of animal. That happened sometimes. Creatures from distant parts of the galaxy would wander onto the moon, lost or hungry. But as he got closer, his heart skipped a beat. They were hatchlings. Not just any hatchlings, but of a species that everyone on the moon feared, the Dravari. The Dravari were infamous. Stories about them filled books, holologs, and whispers between miners. They were massive, fire-breathing creatures, or at least that's what people claimed. Entire settlements had been destroyed in the past. Miners said people were terrified of them. Even seeing one from a distance could send seasoned workers running for cover. Yet here, in front of him, were three tiny, defenseless versions of the species, shivering and alone. It was impossible to ignore them. He crouched carefully, trying not to scare them. Their scales were soft and still glimmered with the faint sheen of birth. Their eyes, big and round, looked at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. They didn't growl or hiss. They simply huddled closer together, as if they were trying to keep each other safe. He could see how weak they were, their tiny bodies, trembling, and his heart ached. Despite all the fear and warnings about this species, he couldn't walk away. He glanced around quickly. No one was near, at least, not yet. The mining settlement was a few kilometers away, and the others would never approve if they knew what he was doing. They would want him to destroy the hatchlings or report them to the authorities. But something inside him told him that these creatures didn't deserve harm. They were innocent, lost, and scared. He slowly reached out a hand, careful not to make sudden movements. At first, the hatchlings flinched, curling into a tighter ball. He froze, not wanting to frighten them further. Then, after what felt like an eternity, one of the smaller ones took a tiny step toward him, testing the space between them. Its small head tilted, and it blinked at him. That was all the encouragement he needed. Gently, he picked up the smallest hatchling. Its body was warm, but fragile in his hands. The others watched him with cautious eyes. He spoke softly, more to himself than to them, telling them it was okay, that he wasn't going to hurt them. He could feel their tiny hearts beating quickly, and he realized how vulnerable they were. For a species that was supposedly feared by everyone, they were utterly defenseless at this moment. He carried them back toward his workshop, moving slowly. To avoid drawing attention, the journey was tense. Every shadow could be a threat, every creaking sound a warning. He kept glancing back, making sure the hatchlings stayed together, and he felt a strange mixture of fear and awe. It was not every day that someone held a creature that everyone else in the galaxy considered deadly. Once inside his workshop, he set them down gently. They huddled together immediately, curling into a small, shivering pile. He knelt down beside them and studied their faces. Each hatchling had unique markings on their scales, intricate patterns that shimmered faintly, even in the dim light of the workshop. He marveled at the beauty of it. It was hard to imagine that creatures so small and delicate could grow into the monsters that haunted the miners' stories. For hours, he watched them, trying to understand what they needed. Food was the first concern. He rummaged through his supplies, looking for something safe to feed them. He remembered the ration packs he had for emergencies, the nutrient gels that could sustain almost any life form. It wasn't ideal, but it would keep them alive for now. He carefully offered a small portion to one of the hatchlings. At first, it hesitated, sniffing the gel with suspicion. Then, with a small chirp, it began to eat. The human felt a wave of relief. It was a small victory, but it mattered. The hatchlings were alive, and for the first time, they were safe. He spent the rest of the day observing them, making notes, and adjusting his workshop to make it more suitable for their needs. He created a small enclosed area with soft padding, warmth, and a little water source. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them comfortable and secure. As night fell, he sat back and watched them sleep. Their tiny chests rose and fell steadily, a sign that they were finally resting. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't in a long time: hope. Hope that perhaps not all the stories about the Dravari were true. Hope that compassion could make a difference. And hope that these small lives could survive despite the odds stacked against them. He knew he was taking a risk. If anyone discovered what he was doing, he could lose his job, face severe punishment, or even endanger himself if the adult Dravari found out he had the hatchlings. Yet he didn't regret his decision. There was a strange bond forming already, something silent but powerful, between him and these tiny creatures. They had no idea what the future held, but at this moment they trusted him, and he would not betray that trust. Sleep came slowly for him that night. Every creak and hum of the workshop made him alert. Every shadow seemed alive. But he kept thinking about the hatchlings, about how fragile and yet remarkable they were. He realized that, in his quiet, lonely life, this small act of compassion had given him purpose beyond work and survival. It was something deeper, something that reminded him that life, in any form, deserved care and protection. By the next morning, he had made a decision. He wouldn't hide them forever. He would find a way to protect them while understanding more about who they were. He started making plans, thinking of how to keep them fed, safe, and healthy. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Others would question him, and there would be challenges he hadn't yet imagined. But he felt ready, for the first time in a long while, to face whatever came next for the sake of these small, frightened hatchlings. And so, the quiet human, living alone on a remote moon, began a journey that would change not only his life, but the life of the most feared creatures in the galaxy. He didn't yet know how far this path would go, or what the consequences of his compassion would be, but he understood one simple truth. When life is in need, even the smallest act of courage can ripple into something far greater than anyone imagines. That day marked the beginning of a story no one expected, a story where fear could be replaced by care, and where even the most hated creatures might find hope in the unlikeliest of humans. The next morning, he woke with a sense of purpose. The tiny Dravari hatchlings stirred in their little enclosure, stretching their fragile limbs and opening their large, round eyes to the soft light filtering through the workshop windows. They were no longer trembling as much. Overnight, they had begun to trust him a little more. Seeing them awake and curious filled him with a mix of relief and awe. He had never imagined that creatures so feared across the galaxy could seem so vulnerable, so innocent. Feeding them again was the first task of the day. He carefully prepared their nutrient gel and watched as the hatchlings tentatively approached. Each bite they took seemed to restore some small spark of life and energy within them. One of them, slightly braver than the others, came closer to him, sniffing his hand before nibbling at the gel directly from his palm. He smiled quietly. That small gesture felt monumental trust building in real time. a fragile bridge between species that should have been enemies. After breakfast, he decided it was time to start understanding them better. He observed how they moved, how they interacted with one another, and even the tiny sounds they made. They chirped softly when excited, and sometimes emitted low hums when content. He made mental notes of their behaviors, imagining how they might grow, how they might change, and what it would mean to raise creatures that others feared. Every movement fascinated him. Every glance of those wide, expressive eyes made him feel connected in a way he had never experienced before. The morning passed quickly. He spent hours making small adjustments to their space. He padded corners with soft materials, making little platforms where they could climb and explore safely. He also made sure there was warmth in their area, because, like many newborns, they were sensitive to the cold. The more he worked, the more he realized that raising them would not just be a matter of feeding them. He would have to watch over them constantly, learn their habits, and anticipate their needs. By midday, he noticed that they had started playing with one another. They tumbled over each other clumsily, their tiny claws barely capable of gripping the soft padding. One hatchling tried to hop onto the back of another, only to tumble off in a heap. The human laughed quietly, the sound echoing softly in the workshop. For a moment, it was easy to forget the fear and danger associated with their species. Here, in this small space, they were just young creatures learning the world. As any human child would. As he watched, he felt a deep sense of responsibility. He knew that the universe would never forgive a human for harboring Travari, especially the most hated kind. But in that moment, it didn't matter. These small lives had nothing but him to protect them. He would have to be clever, cautious, and compassionate. He began planning a routine feeding, observation, and small exercises to keep them active. He realized that this was not a temporary act. This would be a commitment, perhaps for years, and he accepted it quietly in his mind. Hours later, while he was working on repairing a piece of mining equipment near the edge of the workshop, one of the hatchlings slipped from its enclosure. It tumbled toward the open door, wings flailing. He rushed forward, heart pounding, and scooped it up just before it fell to the cold metal floor. His hands shook slightly. That small incident reminded him that even the slightest mistake could hurt them, and that he would need to stay vigilant at all times. He gently set the hatchling back into the enclosure and took a moment to calm himself. After that near accident, he decided to spend more time outside with them. He carried them one by one to a small, enclosed outdoor area he had created for fresh air. The hatchlings explored cautiously, sniffing the alien soil and examining every stone and crevice. He watched carefully, making sure no one could see them from the mining settlement nearby. The wind blew lightly, ruffling their tiny scales, and for a moment they froze, unsure of this new sensation. He knelt beside them, speaking softly, letting them know it was safe. Slowly, they resumed their exploration, gaining confidence with each step. The human also noticed that they were beginning to respond to his gestures. A simple nod could make them approach. A gentle clap would get their attention. Their intelligence was already surprising. He had assumed that, being feared by so many, they would be instinctively aggressive, even at this age. But they were curious, cautious, and surprisingly gentle. This challenged everything he had been told about Travari. Perhaps the stories were exaggerated, or perhaps the fear came from misunderstanding. Later that evening, the human realized he needed to plan for emergencies. He created a small barrier inside the workshop, just enough to contain them if they suddenly panicked or tried to escape. He made sure there were water sources, heat sources, and a safe space for sleeping. As he worked, the hatchlings watched him carefully. Occasionally, one would come close, testing the limits of their trust, and he would reach out to reassure it. It was a delicate dance balancing freedom with safety, curiosity with caution. While he was preparing their sleeping area, one of the hatchlings chirped softly and flapped its tiny wings. It wasn't flying yet, but the effort was clear. He watched, fascinated, as the others tried to imitate it. Their tiny bodies trembled with the effort, and yet they didn't give up. It reminded him of his own life in some ways. The struggle, the perseverance, and the little victories that make all the difference. He realized that his connection with these creatures was growing stronger every hour. They depended on him. Yes, but he was also learning from them patience, observation, and the importance of gentleness. As night fell again, he sat back and reflected. He knew that hiding them from the settlement would only last so long. People would notice eventually. The risk of discovery weighed heavily on him, but the thought of abandoning them was unbearable. They had no one else, no one who cared. That thought alone steeled his resolve. Whatever challenges came, he would face them. The hatchlings had become more than just creatures in need. They were a part of his life now, and he could not turn away. Sleep came slowly that night. He checked on them several times, watching as they curled together for warmth. Their trust was fragile, but growing. He realized that the tiny acts of care he had performed, feeding, gentle touches, speaking softly, had begun to change something fundamental. They were no longer just surviving. They were starting to thrive. Over the next few days, he continued the same routine. Each day, the hatchlings grew stronger, their scales beginning to shine faintly, even in the dim workshop light. Their curiosity increased, and small displays of playfulness became more frequent. They began exploring each other, testing limits, and even showing signs of problem solving. Once, one of them figured out how to reach a small pile of padding. He had stacked, climbing it clumsily before tumbling down again. He couldn't help but laugh quietly at their determination. During these days, he also noticed a subtle change in himself. He felt lighter, more connected, and surprisingly energized. Caring for them gave his life a sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced before. His daily routines were no longer monotonous. They were filled with moments of discovery, small victories, and a bond that grew stronger with every passing hour. The fear that had once dominated the stories he had heard about Dravari began to fade in the presence of these hatchlings. Despite the small joys, he remained cautious. He had to be prepared for the possibility that the adult Dravari might come, looking for them. He had read enough about their kind to know that they could be unpredictable. But he also felt that if he could continue to care for the hatchlings, he might find a way to prove that fear could be replaced with trust. He imagined a future where humans and Dravari could coexist, starting with these tiny, fragile lives in his care. By the end of the week, a pattern had emerged. The hatchlings ate, explored, played, and slept under his watchful eye. They responded to him, trusted him, and began to show small signs of personality. One was bold and curious, often venturing farther than the others. Another was cautious, staying close and observing everything. The third seemed to act as a mediator, balancing curiosity and caution. Watching these small interactions fascinated him. He began to see them as individuals, each with their own unique character. It was during this time that he first began to wonder what the future held. These hatchlings were the offspring of one of the most feared creatures in the galaxy. What would happen when they grew? How would others react? Could his small acts of care truly change what the universe believed about Dravari? These questions weighed on him, but instead of fear, they inspired him. He realized that he was part of something much larger than himself. By protecting these hatchlings, he had stepped into a role he hadn't expected, a guardian, a teacher, and a bridge between species. It was a responsibility that filled him with both pride and trepidation. He knew that every decision mattered, that every act of care could shape their future, and that one mistake could undo everything Got. And yet, despite the uncertainty, he felt a quiet confidence. He had seen what kindness could do, even in the harshest circumstances. These hatchlings had trusted him, and in return, he had given them safety and warmth. That trust, fragile as it was, felt like a promise that he intended to keep, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Days passed, and the human became more confident in caring for the hatchlings. He had settled into a routine feeding them, letting them explore the workshop, and watching them play. Their personalities were becoming clearer. One was bold and adventurous, constantly climbing and testing his patience. Another was cautious, sticking close to the others and observing everything carefully. The third was curious, but gentle, moving between the other two and helping balance their little adventures. Watching them interact brought unexpected joy into his life. Yet, despite the happiness, a sense of unease lingered. He knew that hiding them could not last forever. The mining settlement wasn't far, and curious eyes could easily spot something unusual. More importantly, he had read about the Dravari enough to know that the adults were extremely protective of their young. Stories described how an adult would track down its hatchlings no matter the distance. The thought of an adult discovering his small charges with him in the middle made his stomach tighten. He decided to prepare. He reinforced the workshop, creating hidden spaces where the hatchlings could retreat if something went wrong. He also studied their behavior, learning how they reacted to sounds, lights, and movement. He noticed that they could sense tension, just like any young creature. If he became anxious, they would huddle together or freeze. He realized that keeping calm was not just for his own safety. It was essential for their sense of security. One evening, as he checked the perimeter of the workshop, he noticed something unusual on the horizon. At first, it seemed like a shimmer in the atmosphere, a mirage created by the thin moon air. But as he focused, he saw it clearly, a massive form moving with precision across the barren landscape. His heart skipped a beat. It was the signature of an adult Dravari. Even from this distance, its presence was imposing. The ground seemed to vibrate slightly under the weight of its steps, and a faint heat radiated from its body. He froze, unsure of what to do. The hatchlings were inside, and any sudden movement could alert them. He had to think fast. Panic would be dangerous for both him and the young creatures. He reminded himself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. The adult wasn't attacking yet. It was moving steadily, purposefully, scanning the area. He realized with a mix of fear and hope that it might be searching for the hatchlings. If it was, then it was close. Too close. Inside the workshop, the hatchlings had noticed the shift in his mood. Their chirps and soft hums became hesitant. One of the bolder ones tried to climb the barrier he had built, but he gently guided it back. They needed reassurance, and he knew it. He spoke softly, a calming murmur, telling them it was all right, that they were safe. His hands hovered near them, ready to act if necessary, but he avoided sudden movements. Every second felt stretched out, the tension heavy. In the air, the next few hours passed in a blur. He monitored the adult from a hidden vantage point while keeping the hatchlings calm. He noticed how intelligent the creature was. It didn't rush. It observed, analyzing every footprint, every shift in the wind. It was as if it knew that the young ones were near, and it was approaching with care rather than aggression. The human felt a strange sense of awe. Fear was there, yes, but also an understanding that this creature's purpose was simple: to find its offspring. As the adult drew nearer, he began thinking about what would happen when it arrived. He couldn't keep the hatchlings hidden forever, and confrontation seemed inevitable. But he also realized that there was something unusual in his favor. The hatchlings were thriving under his care. They were healthy, stronger than he had expected, and clearly fed and safe. Perhaps this would matter to the adult. Perhaps it would recognize that he had not harmed them. Finally, the moment came. The adult Dravari stepped into view, immense and terrifying in scale. Its scales glimmered faintly in the dim light, and its eyes were sharp, scanning the environment. The hatchlings froze, sensing the presence of their parent. Their small bodies trembled, but they did not panic completely. The human held his breath. He had no idea how the adult would react. Every story he had heard about Dravari spoke of their ferocity, yet he saw no immediate aggression. The adult moved closer, and the hatchlings responded instinctively. They chirped softly, calling out in their own way, and the adult lowered its massive head to listen. The human watched, fascinated and terrified, as a communication occurred without words. The small creature's trust in him seemed to translate. In some way, the adult paused, its eyes flicking to him, and then back to the hatchlings. It was assessing, not attacking. For a long moment, the human thought he would have to defend them, to act as a barrier between predator and prey. But nothing came. The adult's movements were deliberate, careful, and precise. It crouched slightly, allowing the hatchlings to approach. One by one, they moved toward their parent, chirping and nudging. The human held his position, hands raised, slightly to show no threat. The tension was unbearable, yet a strange calm settled over him. The hatchlings were reunited with their parent. The adult sniffed them, nudged them gently, and then circled them protectively. There was no roar, no fire, no attack. Instead, there was recognition. Gratitude seemed to flow in silent waves, as if the adult understood that the human had cared for its young. The human felt his chest tighten. After all the fear, all the tension, this moment of understanding was more powerful than he could have imagined. He watched closely, noticing details he hadn't seen before. The adult's scales had subtle patterns, almost like the hatchlings, and its eyes held intelligence, emotion, and awareness. Every move was precise, careful, and deliberate. It was not a mindless monster, as the stories had suggested, but a being capable of deep instinct and perhaps understanding. The human slowly stepped back, giving the adult space. The hatchlings chirped happily, nudging him briefly before moving. Back to their parent. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a small thank you without words. The human realized then that his risk, his compassion, had created something remarkable. He had bridged the gap between human and Dravari, if only slightly. Trust had been formed, fragile but real. As night fell, the adult remained nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the hatchlings. The human realized that the creature had chosen to protect the area rather than attack. It was a moment that defied all. The tales he had heard about Dravari. Fear had been replaced by understanding, and a bond, silent but profound, had begun to form. For hours, he observed the adult. It didn't approach him aggressively, but it didn't ignore him either. It seemed curious, calculating, and aware of his role in the hatchling's survival. The human felt an odd mixture of relief, awe, and responsibility. He understood now that every decision he had made, feeding them, protecting them, showing kindness, had led to this outcome. He had earned, in some way, the respect of a creature that had been feared across worlds. The following days were cautious, but filled with hope. The adult remained close, allowing the hatchlings to explore and play under its watchful gaze. The human learned to coexist with this enormous presence, careful not to provoke it, but also encouraged by the lack of aggression. Slowly, he realized that his life had changed completely. He was no longer just a mechanic on a remote moon. He was a caretaker, a guardian, and now a participant in something extraordinary. The hatchlings continued to thrive, and the adult seemed to acknowledge his role silently. There was a new rhythm to life in the workshop. feeding, playing, observing, and learning. Fear had not disappeared entirely. It was still there, a reminder of what could happen, but it had been tempered by understanding, respect, and a shared goal, the safety of the young. Through it all, the human began to see a larger truth. Stories of fear, hatred, and misunderstanding often overshadowed reality. The Javari were not monsters without thought or compassion. They were beings with instincts, intelligence, and connections that humans might never fully comprehend. By caring for the hatchlings, he had glimpsed a world beyond fear, a world where trust and compassion could create something extraordinary, even in the face of danger. And so, with the adult Javari nearby, the hatchlings growing stronger, and the human learning every day what it meant to protect and nurture, life on the remote moon began to shift. What had started as a risky act of compassion was turning into a story of connection, understanding, and hope, a story that none of the miners or anyone else in the galaxy could have imagined. The days that followed were different from anything the human had ever experienced. Life on the remote moon had always been quiet and predictable, but now it was filled with constant movement, unexpected sounds, and the presence of creatures that most people would run from in terror. Yet he was not afraid anymore. Fear had not disappeared entirely. It still lingered in the back of his mind, but it had been replaced by something stronger: respect, wonder, and a sense of responsibility he had never felt before. The adult Javari remained near the hatchlings, moving with a calm but powerful presence. Its massive form seemed to fill the entire workshop whenever it crouched or shifted, yet it never threatened him. Instead, it watched carefully, as if learning about this human who had taken care of its young. The hatchlings grew more confident, under the parent's watchful eye, chirping and playing, testing their strength, and occasionally nudging him affectionately. He began to notice small patterns: how the adult nudged the hatchlings back when they wandered too far, how it circled the enclosure to check for threats, and how it seemed to sense when he was tense or uncertain. One morning, he realized that it was time to interact more directly with the adult. Until now, he had been cautious, keeping his distance, unsure of how it would react to his presence. But the hatchlings had grown stronger, more confident, and the adult had shown no aggression toward him. He decided to take a careful step closer, speaking softly in a tone that conveyed peace rather than fear. The adult tilted its massive head, watching him with sharp, intelligent eyes. Every instinct screamed caution, yet he moved slowly, never making sudden gestures. The hatchlings chirped happily, as if encouraging him. It was as though they were telling him, "It's safe. You belong here, step by step." He closed the distance. The adult did not move away. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, allowing him to approach. His heart pounded, but he reminded himself to stay calm. One small wrong move, one sudden gesture, and this delicate balance could be destroyed. Yet, as he extended a hand slowly toward the Javari's massive snout, the adult leaned forward, sniffing him cautiously. Its warm breath brushed against his skin, and he felt a strange shiver of awe and respect. It was the first real interaction with the adult, and it was nothing like he had imagined. There was no aggression, no fire, no threat. Instead, there was curiosity, recognition, and something he could almost call understanding. The hatchlings chirped excitedly, nudging him playfully, and the adult allowed them to move freely around him. It was a delicate, almost magical moment, trust forming between species that were supposed to be enemies. Over the next few hours, he observed the adult closely, learning its patterns and behaviors. It was surprisingly intelligent. He noticed how it communicated with the hatchlings, not with words, but with gestures, subtle movements, and even a low hum that seemed to convey emotion. The human realized that he was witnessing a form of communication he had never imagined. The adult was not a mindless creature driven by instinct alone. It had intelligence, awareness, and even a form of empathy. He began to experiment carefully. A gentle touch here, a slow movement there, always observing the reaction. The adult allowed it, even responded in small ways. A nudge, a low hum, a shift in posture that seemed welcoming rather than threatening. Each moment strengthened their understanding of one another. It was as if, through the hatchlings, a silent bond had been established between them, fragile but growing with every hour. Meanwhile, the hatchlings thrived. They explored more boldly, climbing small structures, flapping their tiny wings, and testing their strength. They would sometimes approach the human, chirping and nudging, and dash back to their parent for reassurance. Watching them, he realized that he was no longer just an observer. He was part of this tiny family. The trust he had earned was tangible, and the joy of seeing them grow filled him with a sense of fulfillment he had never known. One afternoon, while the adult rested near the enclosure, the human decided to try feeding it carefully. He had prepared a mixture of nutrients and small portions of raw materials, safe for Dravari consumption, thinking that offering food could further build trust. He placed the mixture on the ground slowly and stepped back. The adult approached, sniffed, and then ate without hesitation. That single act felt monumental. It was a silent acknowledgement, a recognition that he had not harmed the hatchlings, that his intentions were genuine. From that moment, the dynamic began to shift subtly. The adult allowed him closer presence, and the hatchlings became bolder, exploring areas they had avoided before. It was as if the adult was signaling that the human was now accepted as part of their circle, part of their safety. He could hardly believe it. The creatures that everyone feared, hated, or avoided had accepted him. They had recognized him as a protector, a friend, and perhaps even a member of their small family. The human also began to understand more about the adult's personality. It had preferences, routines, and quirks. Sometimes it would lower its massive head to observe him, tilting slightly as if questioning his actions. Other times it would nuzzle the hatchlings gently, guiding them, correcting them when necessary, always with care. It was fascinating to watch. Every gesture, every movement was a lesson in patience, observation, and respect. He began to reflect on the stories he had heard about Dravari. Monsters, destroyers, fearsome predators, none of it seemed true anymore. The adult and its young were intelligent, capable of affection, and protective of those they trusted. They were creatures of instinct, yes, but also of understanding. His small acts of care had challenged the universe's perception, at least in this tiny corner of Balsam. Yet he remained cautious. Life on the moon was not without danger, and the settlement would notice unusual behavior eventually. Other miners might see the adult or the hatchlings and react with fear, anger, or aggression. He knew he had to be vigilant, to anticipate how. Others might respond, and to protect this fragile bond he had nurtured. Every day required attention, patience, and careful planning. The hatchlings, however, did not care about danger. They played freely, explored new areas, and began imitating the adult in small ways. They would flap their wings, attempt to mimic the adult's hums, and even try to nuzzle him gently as he moved among them. Watching this interaction filled him with joy. It was a rare and precious moment life, thriving against odds, trust forming across species, and fear slowly giving way to understanding. One evening, the human noticed the adult approaching him directly. Its eyes were fixed on him, steady and unblinking. For a moment, he froze, unsure of the intent. But then it lowered its massive head, nudging him gently with a warm, leathery snout. It was a simple gesture, yet profound. A silent acknowledgement of his role, a recognition of his care for the hatchlings, and perhaps even a promise of protection. He reached out slowly, touching the side of its face gently. The adult leaned into the touch, a low rumble vibrating in its chest. He felt a strange warmth, a connection that transcended fear, language, or species. It was a bond forged through patience, trust, and compassion, one that he knew would last as long as he honored it. Over the following days, this bond grew. The adult allowed him to move more freely around the hatchlings, to interact with them directly, and even to observe the adult closely. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant attention and respect, but it worked. Together, they created a small, safe world within the workshop. The hatchlings grew stronger. The adult watched and guided, and he continued to learn every day what it meant to care for being so different from himself. He realized that this experience had changed him profoundly. Life had once been routine, predictable, and lonely. Now, every day was filled with learning, connection, and responsibility. He had entered into a relationship with creatures that were feared by everyone, yet he had found common ground. Trust and compassion had bridged a gap that many thought impossible. And so, life on the remote moon settled into a new rhythm. Feeding, exploring, observing, and learning became the fabric of every day. The human, the hatchlings, and the adult Dravari formed a fragile but real family, a family born not of chance, but of care, courage, and understanding. They had survived the first encounter, proven that fear could be replaced with trust, and shown that even the most hated creatures could be understood and respected. This newfound bond would not remain a secret forever, and he knew challenges lay ahead. But for now, in this quiet, rugged corner of the galaxy, life was different. Life was filled with trust, compassion, and a connection that no one could have predicted. A connection between a human and a species that had been feared for generations, yet now offered understanding and protection in return. Life on the moon had settled into a new rhythm, though it was far from ordinary. The humans' days were filled with feeding the hatchlings, observing their growth, and cautiously interacting with the adult Dravari. Each day brought new discoveries, new lessons, and moments of awe he never expected to experience. The bond between him and the creatures was growing stronger, though he never let himself forget that this connection was fragile. One wrong move could destroy everything he had worked for, and he knew the universe did not easily forgive mistakes. The hatchlings had grown noticeably stronger over the past weeks. Their tiny bodies were more agile, their eyes brighter, and their chirps more expressive. They began testing their abilities, hopping onto higher platforms, flapping their small wings with determination, and even attempting to climb walls. Every success, no matter how small, brought them joy and gave the human a sense of pride unlike anything he had felt before. He often found himself laughing quietly at their antics, amazed by their resilience and intelligence. The adult Dravari had taken a more active role in guiding the hatchlings. It would gently correct them when they strayed too far or tried something dangerous, nudging them back with a careful touch of its snout or a low hum. The human watched these interactions closely, learning to anticipate the needs of both the young and the adult. He began to notice subtle patterns in their behavior, the way the adult shifted its weight when it felt a threat, the tiny chirps that signaled happiness or curiosity, and even the way the hatchlings mirrored his movements. When he interacted with them, one morning he realized it was time to try something bold. The adult had already accepted his presence, and the hatchlings had grown confident enough to explore beyond the enclosure under careful supervision. He decided to attempt a small exercise to strengthen trust further. With gentle movements, he guided the hatchlings to explore a larger area outside the workshop, keeping the adult nearby but at a respectful distance. He spoke softly, Encouraging the hatchlings while showing the adult that his intentions were peaceful docked to his relief, the adult did not react aggressively. Instead, it observed closely, its eyes alert but calm. The hatchlings chirped and flapped, their wings exploring every corner while he moved alongside them, ready to intervene if needed. For hours they played, tested their limits, and returned to him for reassurance. It was a rare and beautiful sight, human and Dravari coexisting in a fragile harmony, trust growing stronger with every moment. But he knew that life outside the workshop would bring new challenges. The mining settlement was not far, and curious. Eyes could spot unusual movement. He began planning how to protect the Dravari and the hatchlings while maintaining his own safety. He reinforced barriers, created hidden paths, and even set up small alarms to warn him if anyone approached. Every precaution mattered, even with the adult's presence. He understood that the universe was not yet ready to accept this unlikely family. One evening, while he was observing the adult and the hatchlings, he noticed something extraordinary. A small group of miners had wandered too close to the workshop, curious about strange tracks in the dust and unusual sounds. Panic rose within him, but he kept his movements slow and deliberate. The adult sensed the threat immediately, raising its head and emitting a low rumble that vibrated through the ground. It was a warning, a reminder that it would defend its young if necessary. The miners froze, their eyes widening at the sight of the enormous Dravari. Fear took over, and they stepped back cautiously. The human realized that the adult was not just protective, it was intelligent enough to assess the situation. It did not attack, but it made its power and presence known. The miners, realizing the danger, quickly retreated, leaving the area silent once more. The human exhaled, relief washing over him. He understood that this was only the beginning. The adult's presence was a powerful shield, but it could not replace careful planning and vigilance. As the days went on, the adult began to show signs of gratitude in more subtle ways. It allowed him closer interaction with the hatchlings, even guiding him gently in how to care for them. Sometimes it would nuzzle his shoulder softly or hum in low, steady tones when he approached. These gestures were small but meaningful, a silent acknowledgement that he had earned its trust and respect. The human felt a deep connection, realizing that the adult recognized his role not just as a caretaker, but as a protector, someone who had risked everything for the safety of the young. One afternoon, he noticed the hatchlings attempting something remarkable. They were trying to mimic the adult's movements, flapping their wings, stretching their bodies, and even trying to produce the low hums he had learned to recognize. It was a moment of triumph. Their intelligence, curiosity, and courage were growing every day, and he felt proud to have played a part in their development. These creatures, once considered dangerous and hated, were capable of learning, understanding, and forming bonds. The human began to reflect on what this experience meant for the larger universe. Stories of fear, hatred, and misunderstanding had clouded the truth for generations. Dravari were not mindless monsters. They were intelligent, protective, and capable of trust. By caring for the hatchlings, he had glimpsed a side of the species that most people would never see. He realized that fear could be replaced by understanding, and that even the most unlikely connections could change the way life was perceived. Nightfall brought a different kind of peace. The adult Dravari rested near the hatchlings, keeping them close and protected. He watched silently, marveling at the trust and bond that had developed. The hatchlings curled together, chirping softly, while he remained nearby, a silent guardian and participant in this fragile family. Every small gesture, the way the adult nudged them, the way they responded to him, and the quiet hums that filled the night, was a testament to the power of compassion. He knew that the journey was far from over. Challenges would come, perhaps, from curious miners, hostile creatures, or unexpected events. But he felt prepared, strengthened by the trust he had earned and the bond he had formed. He had learned patience, observation, and the importance of gentle guidance. He had learned that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, affecting lives in ways no one could predict. Over the next few days, he began to expand their safe area further. With careful planning, he created a larger enclosure where the hatchlings could explore more freely, always under the watchful eye of the adult. He introduced small obstacles and platforms, encouraging them to test their agility and coordination. The hatchlings responded with excitement and determination, flapping, climbing, and chirping with energy. The adult supervised, correcting them gently, and he followed along, guiding them when needed. It became clear that the adult was not just protective, it was a teacher. It communicated lessons in subtle ways, showing the hatchlings how to move, how to respond to threats, and even how to explore safely. The human marveled at its intelligence, realizing that this creature, feared by so many, was capable of shaping the young one's growth with care and patience. He felt privileged to witness this process, understanding more about life, trust, and connection than he had ever known. The adult also seemed to acknowledge his role quietly but clearly. Occasionally, it would nuzzle him or lower its massive head when he approached. These gestures were small but meaningful, signaling recognition and gratitude. He realized that he had become part of something extraordinary, a bond between human and Dravari, fragile yet real, built on trust, respect, and the shared goal of protecting the HATC one day. While observing the hatchlings playing near the edge of the new enclosure, he noticed a shift in the adult's behavior. Its eyes scanned the horizon, its body tense but controlled. He understood immediately. The universe had not forgotten them. Threats could arrive at any moment. Yet the adult did not panic. It remained poised, ready to protect the young, and he felt a surge of confidence. With the adult nearby and the hatchlings growing stronger every day, he knew they could face whatever challenges came. Evenings were quieter, filled with moments of reflection. He would sit near the hatchlings, watching them curl together or interact with the adult. The quiet hums, gentle nudges, and playful chirps created a peaceful rhythm. He thought about the life he had once led, solitary, predictable, and empty, and realized how profoundly it had changed. Now, his life was intertwined with these creatures, filled with connection, responsibility, and the constant wonder of discovery. He understood that this was only the beginning. The adult and the hatchlings were teaching him about life, trust, and compassion in ways he had never imagined. He had seen fear replaced by understanding, hatred replaced by curiosity, and isolation replaced by connection. The experience had changed him fundamentally, showing that even in the harshest environments, kindness and courage could create bonds that transcended species, fear, and expectation. And so, life continued on the moon, filled with quiet lessons, growing trust, and the remarkable bond between a human and the most feared creatures in the galaxy. The hatchlings grew stronger. The adult remained a silent guardian, and the human learned every day what it meant to care, to protect, and to connect with life in its most unexpected forms. The days on the remote moon had grown into a rhythm unlike any the human had ever known. The hatchlings were no longer fragile, timid creatures. They were growing, exploring, and learning under the careful guidance of the adult Dravari. The human watched them with awe and pride, realizing that the small lives he had saved were now thriving, stronger than he could have imagined. Every day was filled with new discoveries, laughter at their antics, and the quiet joy of watching them develop trust, curiosity, and courage. The adult Dravari had become a steady, calm presence, It no longer observed him cautiously, but seemed to recognize his role in their little family. Its eyes would follow him with quiet understanding, and occasionally it would nuzzle him gently, a silent gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude. He felt a warmth and connection that he had never experienced before. The fear that had once dominated his thoughts had been replaced by respect, wonder, and a profound sense of belonging. One morning, he noticed the hatchlings attempting more daring feats. They flapped their wings higher, climbed taller structures, and even explored areas he had never expected them to reach. The adult watched them closely, correcting them gently when needed, guiding them in ways that were both protective and educational. The human realized that this was more than simple care. It was a partnership. Together, they were raising the hatchlings, teaching them about safety, curiosity, and the world around them. He began to notice subtle shifts in his own behavior as well. The human had become more patient, more observant, and more connected to the life around him. Every small gesture, every careful movement mattered now. He learned to anticipate the hatchling's needs, to understand the signals of the adult, and to move in harmony with both. Life had transformed from a solitary existence into a shared journey of trust, learning, and mutual respect. Now, as the weeks passed, he realized that the adult Travari had started to see him as part of its circle, not just a caretaker, but a protector. The moments of silent communication nudges, low hums, and careful movements grew more frequent. It was as if the adult was saying, "We trust you. You belong here with us." The human felt a surge of emotion he could barely describe. Trust that had once seemed impossible across species had taken root, strong and unbroken. One afternoon, a challenge arrived that tested their bond. A storm swept across the moon, winds tearing at the workshop, and dust and debris swirling violently. The hatchlings were frightened, chirping frantically and trying to find safety. The human moved quickly, guiding them to secure spaces and speaking softly to calm them. The adult positioned itself around the hatchlings, shielding them from the hatchlings' worst of the wind with its massive body. It was a moment of pure instinct, care, and protection, a reminder of the power of their bond. The storm lasted for hours, but by evening the moon fell silent once more. The hatchlings were safe, and the adult remained vigilant, quietly checking each one. The human sat nearby, exhausted but filled with awe. He realized that the connection he had built was not fragile. It had endured danger, fear, and the raw power of nature itself. Trust had been tested, and it had held. The human felt a profound sense of accomplishment, knowing that his courage and compassion had created something extraordinary. Over the following days, the adult began to allow the hatchlings more independence. They explored farther, tested their wings, and practiced their strength. The human followed alongside, always ready to guide or protect. He noticed how the adult would occasionally communicate with him, subtle gestures that conveyed information about the hatchling's behavior, the surroundings, and even his own presence. It was as if they had developed silent understanding, a language of trust and respect that transcended words. Life settled into a new normal, but the human never forgot the risk he had taken. The settlement nearby was still a potential threat. Curious eyes could see something unusual, and not everyone would understand the bond he had formed. He continued to plan, observing carefully, and creating contingencies to protect the hatchlings and their guardian. Every decision mattered. Every moment required vigilance, yet he no longer felt alone. The adult and the hatchlings were partners in this journey, and together they could face whatever came their way. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the horizon, the human noticed a quiet moment of connection that would stay with him forever. The hatchlings were nestled against the adult, chirping softly while he approached slowly. The adult lowered its massive head, allowing him to touch its scales gently. He felt warmth radiate from its body, and a low, vibrating hum filled the air. The hatchlings looked up at him, chirping happily, as if acknowledging that he was part of their family. It was a moment of pure trust, respect, and understanding, a bond that had defied fear and expectation. He realized then that this experience had changed him completely. The life he had known predictable, lonely, and ordinary was gone. In its place was a life filled with connection, responsibility, and profound learning. Every day brought challenges, yes, but also rewards. The hatchling's growth, the adults, trust, and the unspoken communication that had developed between them all. He had become more patient, more compassionate, and more aware of the delicate balance of life. As the hatchlings continued to grow, he began to teach them in small ways. Not just feeding or safety, but lessons about movement, curiosity, and problem-solving. He encouraged them to explore new areas carefully, to test their strength, and to understand the world around them. The adult guided them as well, and together they created an environment where learning was safe, natural, and rewarding. The hatchlings thrived under this guidance, displaying intelligence and creativity that amazed him. The human also reflected on what this experience meant for the universe. Stories of Davari had long been filled with fear and hatred, yet he had witnessed something entirely different. The adult and its young were capable of trust, learning, and even gratitude. Through his small acts of care and courage, he had bridged a gap that seemed impossible, creating a bond that transcended fear, prejudice, and species. He realized that the universe was not simply defined by what people feared. It was shaped by the choices, actions, and compassion of individuals willing to take a chance. One morning, as the first light of the sun spread across the moon's surface, the human noticed a change in the adult's behavior. It moved closer to him, nudging him gently with its massive snout. The hatchlings chirped, watching, and one of them even hopped toward him playfully. The adult lowered its massive head, allowing him to touch it without hesitation. It was a silent gesture, an acknowledgement that he was part of their family, a protector and a friend. The human felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had saved lives, nurtured them, and earned the trust of one of the most feared creatures in the galaxy. Life continued like this, peaceful yet full of wonder. The hatchlings grew stronger and more confident every day. The adult remained a vigilant guardian, teaching, protecting, and communicating in ways that fascinated him. He had learned to understand its gestures, hums, and movements, forming a silent dialogue that allowed them to coexist in harmony. Together, they had created a small sanctuary of trust and care in a harsh and unforgiving world. Finally, one evening, the human realized the full impact of what had happened. The hatchlings, once fragile and vulnerable, were thriving. The adult, once a figure of fear and danger, had become a guide, teacher, and partner. And he, once alone and cautious, had become part of this extraordinary family. The bond they had formed was rare, fragile, and powerful, a reminder that compassion, courage, and trust could create miracles, even in the most unlikely places. He sat quietly, watching the adult and hatchlings settle for the night. Their trust was complete. The dangers of the universe still existed, but within this small corner of the moon, a family had been created, one born not of blood or expectation, but of care, bravery, and understanding. The human understood that this experience had changed him forever. He was no longer just a solitary figure on a distant moon. He was part of something extraordinary, a protector, a friend, and a witness to the power of trust and connection. As he looked at the adult Davari resting near the hatchlings, and the tiny creatures chirping softly around him, he realized that his life had been transformed. Fear had been replaced by understanding. Hatred had been replaced by respect. Loneliness had been replaced by family. And in that moment, he knew that he had not only saved lives, he had helped change the story of a species, proving that even the most feared creatures could be understood, trusted, and loved. And so, under the twin moons of the remote world, the human, the hatchlings, and the adult Dravari remained together, a silent testament to courage, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds that could form when someone dared to care. Their story, born of risk and hope, would continue, a living proof that trust and understanding could overcome fear, and that even the most unlikely friendships could change the course of life itself.